Please welcome our next speaker, Simon Fischer, a software architect. Today, he will be presenting handling files with Azure Blob Storage the right way. Please stick around after Simon's session for a live Q&A.
Hi everyone, and thank you for joining this DynamicsCon session. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to introduce to you today into how to handle files with Azure Blob Storages from Business Central. A few words to myself. My name is Simon Fischer, I'm from Hamburg, Germany, and I'm a software architect with a global Microsoft partner. Let's dive right into it. What can you expect of today's session? I will start with a bit of theory, giving you a general overview of evolution of file handling in our beloved product. I will talk a bit about limitations and challenges we might face in SaaS scenarios. I will also give you a brief introduction into Azure Storage Accounts. But the biggest part of this session will be the practical part. I will introduce you into a sample scenario, and I've prepared some demos based on this scenario. And of course, I will also introduce you into a new app. Let's have a look at the evolution of file handling in NAV and Business Central. In the early days, it was very easy. The two-tier architecture of the system didn't leave much room for error. You were just able to open a file and read it, or create a new one and write to it. It was pretty straightforward. In the later days, things got a bit more complex. When the three-tier architecture was introduced, you needed a bit to worry about which tier is accessing the file. So was it the server, and you needed to upload it first from the client, and or where the file created on the server, and you wanted to publish it to the user later on and download it. So it was a bit more complex. So how is this when we talk about file handling in the cloud? First of all, in the cloud, we don't have a file system that we can access, at least nothing that is available to us. Of course, depending on the function, users can still upload or download files via the browser. But when we think about background processes or automatic processes, a few questions come to mind. For example, if there is no file system, how should automatic processes with no UI access these files? Or if we want to make files available to external programs, and how should we approach this? Of course, as with any integration, there's not the one solution for everything. There are different approaches are possible. In some scenarios, it might make sense to create and publish a custom API or a web service to receive data or to make data available to other systems. But not all systems can handle such APIs, especially legacy systems often. And some approaches that were previously possible in on-premise scenarios are not possible in SaaS environments anymore. For example, using a third-party library to integrate an external tool. So before we continue on this track, let me introduce you real quick into the idea or the concept of Azure Storage Accounts. Azure Storage Accounts can be used for different kinds of data objects. We have blobs, we have files, we have queues and tables. For the sake of this session, we will focus on blobs. They have a very powerful API and are quite versatile to use. And the storage accounts in general are very easy to set up and accessible from basically anywhere. They provide a very comprehensive API, and you have no upfront cost and pretty low pricing for if you only talk about small capacities. So let's get back to the file handling track. One possible solution to file handling in the cloud could be to use storage accounts as the only file source for Business Central. Other accounts can provide or receive files via the storage accounts, and systems not capable of being integrated directly can most likely be integrated in other ways, for example, with Azure Functions. Now, let me introduce you into a sample scenario. This is based on a real-world requirement, and I think it's great for this demo. Let's imagine we have to integrate or establish an SFTP-based file exchange. We need to periodically download and upload data to and from a third-party server. But the obvious problem, of course, direct upload or download is not possible because Business Central does not provide any functionality to do this. So let me show you a quick example. I first walk through the process itself without explaining too much, and then we look at the details. So I have prepared a demo container here, and also in the background I have prepared a little SFTP server that we will use in this demo. So I will start with something from the new app I will still introduce you to, but first let me do a quick test, quick demo, and then walk through the steps in detail. Here we have a connection to Blob Storage account, and I will just upload a file here for the sake of this demo. So now, of course, you can assume it's already uploaded to the storage account. But in the background, what happened on the SFTP server? It's also already here. So let me walk you through what happened. Sorry. Let me first show you 2 more slides, and then I'll walk you through the details of this first demo. The not so secret sauce of this demo is the usage of the Azure Blob Storage API app that is developed open source. In the background, when I connected to the storage account, what actually happened was almost as easy or even easier than file handling in the 2-tier architecture. So the actual work is done with only 1 line of code to upload or download a file. And of course, this app offers much more than just uploading and downloading. In total, Microsoft provides 46 operations for this API, and 45 of these are currently covered in this app. So let's have a look at the steps in between of the demo I showed you. From here, I uploaded the file. And now let's move on. Let's move to the Azure side of it. Here's the resource group we were using for this session. We have a storage account, we have a function app. These are the major resources we are using. The app service plan is a mandatory child resource for the function app, and the application insights are just used for logging. On the storage account, we have here the different entry points for the different data objects I talked about earlier. We will work with containers, that's for the blob storage. And here on the containers, we will ignore the first 3 ones because these are system generated from the Azure function. And we will look at the download and upload container mostly. In the upload container, we now already see an archive directory. with the file that we've just uploaded. And how did it, I didn't upload it to the archive directory, but how did it end up there? So this happened via a function in this function app. Let's have a look at this. The function app consists of two functions. There's the download from SFTP function and an upload to SFTP function. The upload to SFTP function is a so-called blob trigger. And this blob trigger is executed whenever we have a new blob on the container. And the other function, the download from SFTP, is a timer trigger function. And in this demo, it is executed every 5 minutes in the background. So this function is actually, the biggest part is pretty straightforward, or the most important part. Every Azure function starts with a run method. And if we ignore variable handling and logging, it's actually only these two lines to initiate the FTP connection and the upload. And if the upload was successful, we either move the file to the archive directory, or we move the file to the error directory. I will come back to the code of the Azure functions later. Let's first get back to the slides. So again, of course, there's much more than downloading and uploading to the app. But the best thing actually is that it's open source and you can find it on GitHub. And feel free to contribute to it. Feel free to raise issues if you notice anything. But now let's continue with more demos and to give you an idea how you can use this for integration projects. The first demo is also from a real-life scenario. It's about automatically exporting and uploading payment files from the payment journal into the storage account and subsequently into the SFTP server. So let's have a look at Business Central again. We start in the payment journal. And in the payment journal, we have the standard functionality to export what we have in the journal as a payment file that we can then import into our banking software to initiate transfers. And this is based also on the standard setup of the bank export import setup. And the only thing that I extended here is for this line, the link to the blob storage code to the setup. And normally when you click on export, it will download the file and the user needs to manually transmit it where it needs to be into the banking system. But let's click here. Okay, it was already exported, but I export it again. Let's click here. And just a moment later, we should see it here. Okay, the FTP needs to reconnect. Sorry, that would take a moment. But let's have a look at the storage account in the meantime while it's connecting at the container. And we see a second file in our archive directory. So this is just the file that has been generated and exported by Business Central. Maybe you know this format already or this function, and this looks familiar to you. So what actually happened in the background? Let's have a look at the code. On the table, of course, I added the field for the blob storage connection. So that's just one field and actually a flow field to add the description. On the page, it's the same. It's just adding the fields here. The interesting part actually is in this code unit. And this code unit starts basically with the event of the code unit that normally exports the file. And we do some checks in the setup, and if all conditions are met, we call export from temp blob here. And this is also pretty straightforward. We do some setup checks, of course, but the actual transfer to the storage account is just this one line, upload blob into container. And every API request needs to be authorized, of course, and you need to give the API some information. So in our scenario, I provided the authorization type with this, which is an access key, and I provided the information of the storage account name and the container name where we want to upload it. And that's the whole solution. The biggest part, of course, in the background, we have it here on the SFTP. That's the Azure function. But in the background, the Azure function transferred the file to the SFTP. And of course, you will also get the template for all Azure resources and the Azure functions, of course. And let's have a look at the next example. So another scenario I just recently had with a customer was that they wanted to be able to automatically import bank statements from an external provided file, and this was also done via SFTP. And the idea here is to have a job that checks the storage account periodically for new files and import the files as bank statements into the bank account reconciliation. This is also a standard BC process. Let's go back to Business Central and have a look at the bank account reconciliation. And here you normally create a new bank account reconciliation, select your bank account, and when you did set up, then you select import bank statement. Import bank statement works with the data exchange definition, and in every Kronos database, for example, there is the default setup for SEPA-based bank statements, and you can use this example right away in any Kronos, and I think in most other databases. And what I did here is I set up a job queue entry, and the job queue entry basically just has the object ID that you need, and as a parameter string, the bank account number that you want to import statements from. So that's basically the setup. Actually, I really wanted to show you a real example of it, but I couldn't come up with Kronos sample data for the bank statements, and I hesitated to use real customer data. So please keep in mind. I can't show you the whole process here, but I can show you the biggest part, and that's basically that we have a way to download something from the SFTP, put it in the storage account, and from there we can have a look at the code in BC in a moment. Let me reconnect to the SFTP real quick, and let's assume that this data here was uploaded by a third-party system, and that we need to process this now. I'm looking at my watch, and I set up the Azure function to run every 5 minutes. So now we either need to wait 3 minutes or I execute it manually. I think to avoid losing too much time, let me run it manually really quick. Let's go to download from SFTP. Here we can already see that it is being run regularly, actually every 5 minutes. We can also see it in the log that it is executed every 5 minutes. Here you see it's always in a 5-minute range. And now let's have a look at the code. Again, we have a run function, which is the entry point for this. And if we also ignore logging for a moment, and we see here, we have a function get available files from SFTP. And if there are no files, we exit again. And if there are files, we call copy from SFTP to blob storage. And when this is done, we delete the files on the server because we don't need them anymore. We already have them in our blob storage. And let me just run this manually here. It's the same what would happen in the background in 1 or 2 minutes anyway, but here we see directly the log. Okay, downloaded 3 files. Let's look again on the server. After I refresh it, now the directory is empty because the files were deleted. Let's check the storage account. Now here we should have in the download container our files. And from here, the demo I would have loved to show you with the bank statements would start. So let's assume the job queue entry was run and we have a new bank statement imported. In the background, or the code that is run in the background, again, we have the table extension and page extension. That's basically what we had before, the blob storage code on the bank export import setup. Same as on the page. And then we have the code unit. And this is also, no, there's no magic, but I want to explain to you how it works. This code unit runs on the job queue entry. It gets the parameter string for the bank account from the job queue entry, and then we call the function check for new files. And there are there it downloads the whole content from the container and checks if there are any new files. And if you find something, we move on to download and import files. And the interesting part from a business perspective is actually in import from stream, because there we use the data exchange definition and the standard bank account reconciliation functionality to process the bank statement. And besides that, here you see again, we have a download function, try download to stream, where we initialize the request and give the information in which storage account, for in which container, and which blob name we want to download. And that's, again, already it. If the download and import was successful, the blob gets moved to the archive directory, and if not, it gets moved to the error directory. So this is also, I'm running this with multiple customers already in production. This works very nice and very reliable. So let's have a look at another example that is not just uploading and downloading, to give you an idea of the possibilities. Let's assume we have a long-running process, and during this process, we need to upload data to a storage container. And to avoid that other users, for example, delete the container while we are working on it, we want to lock it for other users. So let me show you another sample in BC. This is just a real generic example. Nothing is really actually happening. I call process with logging. And now it does a bit. And when it's done, it uploaded a log file to a container. But the interesting part is what happens. We see here acquiring infinite lease for container. Okay, and then it does some processing and then it's done. What happened here? Let's look at this example. On the page, there's just the action that is being called. There's nothing exciting. But in the code unit, there's a function that's called prevent container deletion while processing. Pretty obvious, right? We have some logging here, just for the sake of this demo. But basically the first real thing that we are doing is we acquire a so-called lease. A lease is basically a lock that prevents other users from deleting the container. And we can acquire a lease for an indefinite amount of time or for a period between 15 and 60 seconds. In this example, I acquired for an indefinite amount of time, so you really need to make sure that you release the lease later on, because otherwise no one can remove this container. So what we're doing after we call this API operation, we get the lease ID from the response, and remember that here. Then we do our actual processing, but the processing itself, there's not much happening. I just added something so that it's not done in 1 millisecond. And from after that, we upload our log file. That's what we logged here. And we upload this to a blob. That's what I just showed in the Azure portal. And after that, we release the lease on the container. So we call the necessary function, give it the lease ID, and then the container release is released. And that is actually very helpful if you know you have processes that run a little bit longer and you want to make sure that no one else interferes with the container. Then you can achieve this with this. But again, of course, there's more to this API. So if I just scroll over the list of available functions, you see there are a couple of functions. These are only the API functions, and so you have multiple options, but just sifting through code is also not the only is also not so interesting. So let's have a look at the GitHub project. Here you can just clone it and use it in your projects. And it also there's also a wiki with examples and a little tutorial, and the API coverage status is a good starting point if you look for the API operations. This is how Microsoft listed in their documentation. For example, here's also the link to the Microsoft documentation, and you directly have the BC function on the other column. So you see there are some functions, and there is one missing at the moment. That's the batch function, batch operation. And also, of course, feel free to create any issues here. If you encounter any problems, just raise an issue, and I will look into it. yeah, and besides that, of course, I promised you that everything I showed you is available to you, and I prepared an Azure DevOps repository for it. Just go to repositories, files, and in the main branch, I just added a README. We have different branches here with the demos, and you can also just click on the README link and log in. You have the same code that I showed you previously. And of course, you might want to test exactly this scenario, right? And you don't want to manually set up the function app probably. So I prepared something for this as well. Just go to the deploy AZ function branch and click on deploy to Azure. And let's do this real quick to show you there's nothing to worry about. And oh, sorry. Just click on create after providing the resource group name. And now it takes around 3 or 4 minutes, I guess. So let's continue with something else. In this session demo project as well, there's another repository. And this is the basis for the Azure function that is just being deployed in the other tab. So here you see the download from SFTP and upload to SFTP functions. I chose the C# script files here because it's the most easy to demo. Of course, I could have deployed a DLL or a container, but CSX file it's just a text file. It's easily readable by anyone. You can just modify it real easy. And you don't need any third-party tooling to execute it. That's why I chose the C# scripting. Here you see that's what I already showed you in the Azure portal for the function app. You can just go through this, and actually the code you see here is the basis to deploy for the deployment that is running in the background. The created Azure function will be linked to this repository so that you have exactly the same resources as I did. If you, by any chance, also need an SFTP server to test, there is on an external blog, someone provided a similar template. There's also a deploy to Azure button on this blog. So if you need an SFTP to test with, go just use this template. Let's have a look at the deployment. It's almost done. This is the link to the repository I've just shown you. So it should be done in a couple of seconds. And the only thing you have to do after this is done, after you deployed this, is actually provide the URL to the SFTP and the credentials. I will show you in a second where you put this. So let's go to this resource group, and you probably see the similarities to this resource group. We have a storage account, we have a function app, an app service plan, and the application insights. The storage account already has the containers that are configured in the function apps. And the function app, the configuration is also no secret. You just go to configuration in the portal, click show values to see all. Here, for example, the archive container path or the error container path, these are the variables that are used in the function. Let's have a look again here. For example, working container name upload. That is here. and working container name download is here. So you only need to provide the address of your FTP server and the credentials. Of course, in a production environment, you wouldn't save the credentials here as plain text, but instead of pasting the password here, you can basically just paste a link to an Azure Key Vault secret as well. So you don't have to use plain text passwords here. But for demo purposes, I think it's the easiest way. All right, let's go back to the slides. Here are some links to the resources I've already shown you. If you don't like to type these links, here are the same links as QR codes. So I hope you used the conference chat to post some questions. If not, you can still do this, of course. I will be here after this session and answer your questions live. So feel free to ask whatever you liked or whatever is unclear from the demos. And if you want to reach out afterwards, after this session, feel free to contact me on one of the other channels listed here. Thank you for joining this DynamicsCon session, and I hope you liked it as much as I did. And I looking forward to get in touch with you in the chat.
Okay, so let's start again with Bruno's question. You asked how steep the learning curve for Azure Function is for an AL developer. I think it really depends on if you really only know AL or if you have some experiences with other languages like C# or JavaScript or whatever. And you really only get to need to get your head around the starting point for an Azure function. Like for a timer trigger, of course, it's pretty easy whenever the timer is executed, or the blob trigger whenever a new blob is there. But I think the more complex is the deployment. If you start to deploy a more complex project with a DL or an executable, that is because you need to get a feeling for the deployment towards in VS Code. But if you can install an extension in VS Code and use the login function there, then you should be good to go. Also, Bruno asked about possibilities via Power Automate so blob storages together with Power Automate. I think so. I don't see anything right away that would speak against it. But actually, I haven't used it in this scenario. So if you can come up with an idea, I can come up with a demo maybe for you. But not during this Q&A. I think I will need a couple more minutes to prepare. Adrian asked which solution, if you don't want to use the Azure option. I saw that it's possible to use OneDrive to manage files with BC. No, I don't have a sample for OneDrive integration. Actually, this session is more dedicated for the open source app I created for the Blob Storage API. I think this API is very powerful, and I needed it already a lot in other projects. So that's why I started this open source project. Because I hated that in customer projects there was not enough budget to create a really great solution. So I started, well, let's do an open let's create an open source project and spend some time on it so anyone can profit off of it. But I think maybe if OneDrive needs to be or should be integrated, it probably has an API as well. There are also Azure files instead of Azure blobs. So maybe this is also something you could use. So yeah, but with OneDrive, I would have to check it out. And to answer in between Waldo's question, of course, you can also use PowerShell in Azure Functions. Carsten asked asked about the cost for everything. Actually, what I have set up in the demo, I think that should be around something between $4 and $6 per month. So the storage, if you only have a couple of kilobytes or megabytes in it, it doesn't really matter. I think the storage is 30 something cents. And the Azure function with the execution every 5 minutes for the timer trigger and the execution based on the blobs. So I use it in a couple of projects, and none of these projects had costs, I think, above $8 or $9 per month. And we did have other resources there as well. Waldo, you guessed right. Yeah, the axes on the calendar are the Dynamics Con days. Yeah. Ola asked, what happens if we use an infinite lease and an error occurs before the container is released? Well, of course, there is in the portal, you have the option to resolve that. If you didn't remember the lease ID, someone with the account owner rights needs to resolve this. I think there's also the option to do this via the API. I'd have to look it up before I say something wrong, but I think the account owner can do it via API as well. But with the correct permissions, you can also easily do it in the Azure portal. So you see in the portal, if there is a lock on a container, you see it in the last column on the container list. You see that it's an active lease, and you can just click on it and resolve it if you need. Well, Milian just asked whose Azure account I'm using when I use a setup like this in a customer project. So typically, of course, I always an account from the customer. So setting up an Azure account is very easy. It's basically if you have a Microsoft account, you just activate it, and I think most SaaS customers also have an Azure account. So setting up these resources is really very, very easy. You can just, if you don't want to link the deployment to the demo repository I shared, of course you can just copy the files in your own company repository or in the project repository and link this to the customer deployment. That would make sense. And yeah. Let me go over the chat. I don't have an assistant here, so yeah. Again, me, and to extend the question, to the Azure account, yeah. Typically so how is it working in a project? Normally, I ask the customer to create, for example, a resource group and grant me, or if they want to do it themselves, they can do it themselves, of course. But if they need help, I ask them to grant me permissions for this resource group so that I can set up the resources they need. But actually, when you prepare a little manual similar to like the last demo I did in the session, the customers I'm pretty confident that the customer will be able to do it themselves. Okay, there any other questions here? Because Jeremy guessed right that this is a human error calendar in the background, but that is not a question for this. Do you have any other things on your mind? Otherwise, maybe let me just tell you about the next steps I'm planning. I wanted to have it done already, but I wasn't able. I didn't find the time yet to complete the work on the app, because I was already in contact with Jesper from Microsoft to bring this app into the Business Central repository, so that in every Business Central instance out there, we will have this Blob Storage API available. But if you had a look at the repository, it's not much, but I still need to adjust a bit to have it in the structure that Microsoft needs for the BC repositories or for the BC apps. So I will try to work on this whenever there's some time left. Valdo asks, so you just allow? Yeah, so you just allow all people to fork this repo and use it as a library app in their product? Yes, Valdo, you are right. I do. I thought it wouldn't make sense to. An API is not really something with a where you need to put very much brain into it. It's mostly working through the documentation from Microsoft, and I thought, well, why should everyone in our business need to come up with a similar solution? Actually, I think it makes sense to bring this in the Business Central core to the system apps basically, and have it available just as the system blob storage module or the Azure AD Azure authentication module. I think it makes sense to have this out in the open instead of hogging solutions that anyone can come up with. But Jeremy's asking, have you tinkered with hooking up any Power Automate things to the Azure Blob Storage? Just thinking of maybe push reports. I did not yet. No, actually, the only Power Apps or Power Automate things I've done are really for real-world scenarios, and most questions I get are actually not related to this project yet. So and my knowledge in Power Apps and Power Automate, well, it's a bit, but it's not so much, to be honest. And I think I don't see why it shouldn't be possible, because I think Microsoft has the Azure storage accounts pretty much integrated in their environment, and that's. So I don't see any reason why it wouldn't work. Yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you all for joining. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to get in touch via Twitter, via LinkedIn, via GitHub, whatever you like. And I think, I'm not sure if just my browser is acting up, but I think my camera picture is frozen. I hope you can still hear me. I hope you had as much fun as I did during the session. And yeah, let's get in touch via our social networks. See you, everyone.